Okay. All right. Good morning, everybody.
Morning, good morning.
Where are we at today? We are towards the top of Daf Tzadik Amid Aleph in the middle of the Gemara. 5 lines from the top, Rav Papi. In the Mishnah, we had a situation where a wife makes a shua that either I'm not going to have hana from my father and my father-in-law, or my father-in-law if I have hana from you, or she makes a different neder, which is that if I have hana from my father or my father-in-law, then I won't have hana from you. No, one second, which one is it? Either if I have hana from my father or my father-in-law, I won't have hana from you, or if I have hana from you, then I won't have hana from my father or my father-in-law. Either one. So each of these situations is a case where she's making a shavua, but it's based on a stipulation. So the shvua doesn't actually kick in until the first stipulation is met. The Mishnah says that in both of those scenarios, the husband can be mefer the neder. The Gemara then goes on to tell us, quotes from a brisa, that there is an argument between Rabbi Nassan and Chachamim. Rabbi Nassan says that, different, in contrary to the Mishnah, that no, the husband cannot be mefer because the stipulation has not yet kicked in. And the Chachamim must say that yes, the husband can be mefer even though the stipulation has not yet kicked in. And then the Gemara tells us another story from a situation where a bacher was basically learning in yeshiva, and he wanted to be focused on his learning, and so he didn't want to be disturbed and get married because he knew that would take away from his learning. So he makes a neder that says he's not going to benefit from anyone in the world until he gets married. And through a trick, he ends up getting married, and he needs to, he finds himself now in a challenge. So I forget, was it Rav Acha bar Abba? Was that who it was? I forgot who it was over here. Basically, put got his jacket dirty, and he therefore needed to take it to the dry cleaners. In order to get it cleaned off, he needs to therefore remove his vow. So he had to go to the Chacham to therefore have his vow removed. And so the Gemara uses this as a scenario to prove that when it comes to she'ela being different than afara being where a husband removes his wife's vow, the Gemara uses this as an example to show that when it comes to she'ela, asking a Chacham to remove the vow, you need to have the first the stipulation has to kick in, and only then can you ask for the Talmud Chacham to remove the vow. Rav Papi Amar, Rav Papi 6 lines, where the heck are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines from the top. Rav Papi Amar, Rav Papi says, Machlekes ba'afara, there is an argument when it comes to hafara, and we saw that argument at the beginning of the Gemara. The Rav Nassan holds ein habal mefer, that Rav Nassan holds that the husband cannot be mefer the neder eli im kain chal neder. He cannot be mefer the neder until the stipulation kicks in. Like it says, and then we're going to have a couple quotes here from Sukkim, and I unfortunately do not understand specifically how Sukkim, the sources of Sukkim, and how they prove the points here. But we're just going to rely on them. We're just going to accept them. The chafra halavana. This comes from I think Yeshaya. I thought it was Yeshaya or somewhere.
Yes.
Rabbanan Savri, the Rabbanan hold Baal Mefer, and in this case, the Rabbanan hold that yes, the Baal can be Mefer the neder afal pishlei chal neder. That they hold that the husband could be Mefer the neder even when the stipulation hasn't kicked into siv Mefer machshavas arumim. Okay, avol b'she'ela, but when it comes to asking a chacham to annul a vow, Ivrei Akol, Rav Papi says that everyone agrees that ein chacham matir klum, that the chacham cannot be matir a neder eli im kain chal neder, only until the actual stipulation has kicked in. Once the stipulation has kicked in, only then can the Talmud Chacham be matir the neder. Why? Like it says, layachod varav. So in the Mishnah, we had a Stam Mishnah that said plain blank that when there's a stipulation, the husband can remove the neder. He doesn't have to wait for the stipulation to kick in. In the Gemara, we started off with an argument, and we stated that there's an argument between Rabbi Nassan and Chachamim whether or not the husband has to wait for the stipulation to kick in. Rav Papi brings down that in addition, that this argument between Rabbi Nassan and Chachamim is only related to hafara, but as it relates to she'ela, asking a Talmud Chacham to annul a vow, everyone agrees that you have to wait until the stipulation kicks in. And now the Gemara is going to try to bring two proofs to this idea. Let's see. Here's the first case. A wife or an individual makes a pledge that he is not going to have any hana from another individual. Or he realizes to himself that, wait, I may one day want a loophole. I may want to get out of this. So I'll tell you what, if I'm going to ask a Talmud Chacham to annul my vow that I'm not going to have hana from Pliny, then when I ask the Talmud Chacham that, a new vow is going to kick in, which is going to say, I'm not going to have hana from the person that I asked, from the Talmud Chacham that I asked to annul my vow. So a person kind of saying a person made a pledge, I'm not going to have hana from Pliny, from a specific individual. And a second stipulation, ulamisha eshal olav. And if I ask to get out of that vow, then I will not have hana from the person, from the Talmud Chacham that I asked. So now he realizes, now after he makes this pledge, he realizes, oh, he's got himself in a little bit of a bind, and he wants to get out of it. So the Gemara says, well, what's he going to do if he asks, if he asks the Talmud Chacham to annul his vow? So now he's going to have it's going to be ushered to the Talmud Chacham. So the Gemara says, Nishal al Harishan, Nishal al Hasheni. First, he has to approach the Talmud Chacham about removing the first part of the pledge, and after that, he can ask about removing the second part of the pledge. Now, Ve'in Amrit Nishal, if you're going to be of the belief that Nishal Afal Pishlechal Neder, if you are going to be of the belief that you're allowed to ask a Talmud Chacham to annul a vow, even though the stipulation hasn't kicked in, you can say this. In this case, there was a stipulation that said, if I ask the Talmud Chacham, then the Talmud Chacham is going to become maser to me. So if you are going to be of the opinion that you're allowed to ask a Talmud Chacham to annul your vow, you can do that even when the stipulation hasn't kicked in. Ibay al hay nishal b'reisha, ibay al hay nishal b'reisha. So why does the Gemara say to us that you first have to ask on the first pledge and then on the second pledge? Meaning to say, the Gemara is only telling us you have to ask on the first pledge first and the second pledge second, because the Gemara understands that you can't ask on the second pledge; it hasn't kicked in yet. So Rav Papi's opinion that you can only ask from a Talmud Chacham after the stipulation has kicked in. So this is in theory is a proof to that, because over here we have a situation where a person made a pledge and he made a stipulation, and the Gemara's advice to get rid of it is, well, you have to ask on the first one first, and then you can ask on the second one. You can't ask on the second one first; it hasn't kicked in yet.
This is even if it's like one statement.
Yeah, it is one statement. That's the whole point. It's one statement.
Conditions in one statement.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
So the Gemara says, the language of this, the language that the Gemara says to fix this, to get out of this vow, is you have to, what does it say here? What's the language he says? Where was I here? Okay, so the Gemara says, how do you understand the language here? The Gemara's answer is you have to ask on the first one first and on the second one second. But does it? The Gemara is concerned about the actual wording here. Does it really mean? Do we really know when the Gemara was referring to you have to ask on this promise first and on this promise second, which part of the promise he was referring to? So the Gemara is questioning the verbiage, and therefore the Gemara is saying that it's not necessarily that when the Gemara says nishal al harisha nishal al hasheni, that you're specifically asking on the first part of the pledge or the second part of the pledge. You just ask on one part first and the other part second, not necessarily that specific order. So the Gemara says the verbiage here is not exactly crystal clear, and therefore you can't use that as a proof. So Lema Messiah. So the Gemara says, okay, I'll bring you a different proof. Like a person makes a pledge and he says that I am not going to have any benefit from a specific individual. And another stipulation, he wants to make sure that this pledge sticks. So what happens? And if I go to a Talmud Chacham and I ask to have this pledge removed, then when I do that, my Nazirus is going to kick in. So I'm taking out a pledge that I'm not going to have any benefit from an individual. And the stipulation is that if I do try to get out of this pledge, then I'm going to become a Nazir at that time. So what the Gemara, but then after a short while, he realizes, oh wait, this is not a smart idea. He wants to get out of it. So the Gemara says, Nishalam Nidrai, Nishalam Nazrai. So now it's much more specific, the language. The Gemara is not telling us ask on the first part first and the second part second. The Gemara is telling us specifically, you have to ask first, Nishalam Nidrai. First, you have to ask on the pledge, not to have what to do with a specific individual. And then after that, you can ask the Talmud Chacham on the pledge regarding the Naziris.
So it's the first vow that he derived benefit from. That was the one that he can annul first.
Well, basically, he can't ask the Talmud Chacham to annul the second first because it hasn't kicked in yet. So first he has to ask on the original neder, and then he can go ask on the neder, on the Naziris neder. And if you want to be of the opinion, you want to try to argue that, well, maybe a person could make a pledge. A person could ask to have his pledge removed, even though the stipulation hasn't kicked in yet. So ibay al nidray itchil bresha, ibay al nizray itchil bresha. What does it make a difference if he asks on the neder first, or what does it make a difference if he asks on the naziris first? Meaning, say the only reason it's important to ask on the neder first and the naziris second is because you can't ask on the naziris first; it hasn't kicked in yet. You can only ask to remove the naziris once the naziris kicked in. So the Gemara uses this brisa as a proof, or as attempting to prove that, as it relates to asking a shaila from a Talmud Chacham, you can only do that after the pledge is kicked in. So the Gemara says, Rav Nassan, no, this brisa that we just quoted, where we had this case where the person makes a pledge that he's going to be disavowing himself from an individual. And if he tries to get out of that vow, he's going to become a Nazir. That's not necessarily agreed upon by everybody. That brisa is Rav Nassan. It goes according to Rav Nassan, and we learned earlier at the beginning of this Gemara. Rav Nassan is the one who holds that, as it relates to a husband and wife, he's the only one actually who holds that lo yefer, that the husband cannot annul a vow until the stipulation kicks in. So too, here's a situation where you need to have the assistance of a chacham to remove the vow, and Rav Nassan again holds that the Talmud Chacham cannot remove the vow until the stipulation kicks in. So again, we try to bring two cases to prove Rav Papi's claim that everybody agrees that you have to wait until the stipulation kicks in before you can ask the Talmud Chacham. But we have slightly debunked or questioned, challenged both of those cases. The first case, we said, well, the language isn't crystal clear. It doesn't really mean the first part of the vow and then the second part of the vow. And then in the second case where we said, yeah, the language is crystal clear. It says first you have to remove the neder, and then you can try to remove the naziris. That is not necessarily agreed upon by everybody. That's Rav Nassan who holds that opinion. Amar Ravina says, Amar li Mereimar, Hachi who said Amar Ravina, Amar li Mereimar. Ravina says in the name of Mereimar, Hachi Amar Avucha, your father said to me, Mishmeid Rav Papi, in the name of Rav Papi. Machlaikas ba'afara. There is an argument as it relates to hafara, and that we had at the beginning of our Gemara. One person says the husband could be mefer. One person says the husband cannot be mefer. Aval b'she'ela divrei hakol mefer. But when it comes to asking a Talmud Chacham, everyone agrees that the Talmud Chacham can be mefer the neder before the stipulation kicks in. So this is a brand new version. It's exactly the opposite of what we learned up top. Up top, we learned that Rav Papi says there's a machlekes ba'afara, but everybody agrees that the Talmud Chacham cannot remove the vow until the stipulation has kicked in. Now we have a different version, and this different version says exactly the opposite. That everybody agrees. At least Rav Papi seems to think everybody agrees that you could ask a Talmud Chacham to annul a vow even before the stipulation kicks in.
Mayfair and Mavater, is that the same thing?
Mayfair is the situation where it deals with a husband who is removing his wife's vows. And the Sheila that we're discussing here is a regular individual who goes to the Talmud Chacham to have a vow.
But when someone says they're going to Mavater someone, it's also null.
I don't know. I'm not sure that I'm familiar with that term.
Oh, okay.
That's a Rabbi Smith question.
Okay.
Above my pay grade. I'm sorry. Okay, I finished the sentence. Okay, so Ravina says in the name of Mereimar, who says in the name of his father that he heard from a Papi that machlekes ba'afar. There's an argument ba'afar aval b'sheila divrei kol Mayfair. Everyone agrees that you can be Mayfair. Afal pi shalei chal neder, even though the neder had the stipulation hasn't yet kicked in. Desiv layachal devari. Flipping the page to that Sonic Omen Bays Lameimra. Okay, so why is that? Why is it that we are allowed to ask the Chacham, the Talmud Chacham, to remove the vow even though the stipulation didn't kick in yet? Lameimra delay hava be maisa. Because when the person makes a pledge, it's just lameimra. He's saying something. There's no actual action that's accompanied with a pledge. When the person says, "I'm not going to have enough from somebody," there's no action. There's nothing that happens. He doesn't have enough. There's nothing going on. He's just saying something. So you can't wait. The Gemara is saying you can't wait for something to kick in and to happen. Once he made the pledge, okay, now it's chal, and in theory, he could now go to the Talmud Chacham to have this removed. So now the Gemara is going to try to use the exact same two cases we had on the previous page. Last page, we try to use those two cases to prove that Rav Papi's statement that you can only ask a Talmud Chacham after the stipulation kicks in is agreed upon by everybody. So last page we use these two. We try to use these two cases to prove his point. Now we're going to try to use the same two cases to prove Rav Papi's point again, except this time the point is exactly the opposite, and that is that you can ask the Talmud Chacham whenever you want. You don't have to wait for the stipulation to kick in. Meisvei, we have a brisa kind of she'eni nana lepleni. A person made a pledge that I'm not going to have what to do with any specific individual. And again, if I want to get out of it and I ask the Talmud Chacham to let me out of it, then I'm going to be usher to that Talmud Chacham, usher to have any honor from that Talmud Chacham when I ask to get out. So the Gemara says, well, now how's he going to get out of this pledge that he took? So the Gemara says, he's going to ask first to get rid of the first part, and then he's going to ask to get rid of the second part. So, why, if we're now saying that you don't have to wait for the stipulation to kick in, so then why does he have to wait? Why can't he ask in any order? He can ask on the first, or he can ask on the second. Why does he have to worry about the order? So the Gemara says, how do we know when the Gemara says, how do we know he's asked? How do we know that the language of the Gemara is referring to the first pledge versus the second pledge? Maybe the language is vague. So the Gemara brings the exact same case to try to prove an exact opposite point, and it uses the exact same argument to debunk that case.
Oh wow.
So the Gemara says, okay, I'll bring you a second case. I'm taking a pledge upon myself that I'm not going to have enough from an individual. And in the event that I ask a Talmud Chacham to remove my pledge, then my Nazirus will kick in.
Wow.
So yeah, it's a stipulation. So, but obviously he has buyer's remorse, and he realizes, wait, this wasn't a smart idea.
Right.
And he says, well, oh no, but now if I go ask Talmud Chacham, I'm going to become a Nazir. So how do I get out of this?
Just
right?
Understand, there's a difference between a Talmud Chacham and let's say like a husband.
Yeah.
Only because Talmud Chacham can know something that hasn't happened yet, right?
Well, no, this is exactly what we're kind of discussing here. In the Mishnah, we state specifically that the husband can annul a vow whether or not the stipulation is kicked in. And now we've been having this conversation from Rav Papi whether the same applies to a Talmud Chacham, whether the Talmud Chacham can annul the vow, whether before the stipulation has kicked in, or whether it's not. So initially, Rav Papi made a comment that everybody agrees that you cannot you cannot ask the Talmud Chacham to annul the vow. Now we're taking the exact opposite page. So now we have a situation. We're bringing the exact same case that we brought on the same previous page. Previously, we tried to use that case to prove that you cannot ask the Talmud Chacham. Now we're going to bring the exact same case to try to prove that you can ask the Talmud Chacham before the stipulation. Person makes a pledge, I'm not going to have enough from an individual. And if I ask the Talmud Chacham to have my pledge annulled, then my Naziris is going to kick in. He realizes this isn't a smart idea and he wants to get out of it. So the Gemara says, Nishal al Nidrai, Nishal al Nidrai. In the previous case, we said Al Rishon, Al Achron. You have to ask on the first, and the second one, second. But here we're saying we're much more clear. There's no vagary. You have to ask on the neder first, second, and after that, you have to ask on the nazir. So the Gemara can't argue and say, oh, the language is vague. We don't really know if it's first or second. But why? If you're of the opinion, we just stated, Rav Papi just stated, that you don't have to wait for the stipulation to kick in. You can ask the Talmud Chacham whenever you want. So then why do you have to ask first on the neder and the second on the naziris? You can ask in any order you want. You can ask on the why do you have to ask on the neder first? Why can't you ask on the naziris first? So this remains an open-ended question, and this will go unanswered for now at least. So at the end of the day, we've established that when a wife makes the pledge with a stipulation, the husband can annul it, even though the stipulation hasn't kicked in. As it relates to a Talmud Chacham, there seems to be a remaining question whether or not you can ask, even though the stipulation hasn't kicked in.
This discussion, I'm not sure if the root is like the discussion that we had previously, where the vow kicks in once it's said or once like it takes effect. And I don't remember what was the outcome of that. Did it stay like unsolved?
That was yesterday or 2 days ago.
Yeah. Because this
seems watch the video.
Because all this discussion, it kind of like seems like it's on that base, if it's whether it kicked in or
100%. Yeah, you can't. That's exactly the argument of the Gemara, is that as it relates to a husband, he can annul the vow even though the stipulation hasn't kicked in. But that's the question we're discussing here from Rav Papi, whether or not in a traditional sense can he annul a vow even though it hasn't kicked in yet.
Yeah, I think there was a broader example when like a couple gets divorced, and then that was the stipulation in of itself. So you can't alter that vow until they actually got a get, and then you can.
Like that one was like an extra step because like her circumstance changed.
Yeah.
That one was like even more complex.
Right.
All right, on to the Mishnah. Bari Shaina, back in the day, it was said that 3 women can get out of their marriage and collect their ksuba. Yaitzis finna tells ksuba. They can get out of their marriage and take their ksuba. Ha'imris Tamei Anilach. A woman who makes a claim that she is tummy to her husband. She's tummy to her husband who is a kayin because she was raped. She makes that claim. She's now usher to her husband. Shemaim beini lebeinecha. It's heaven is between me and him. It's a euphemism basically for the fact that she claims that they haven't had children and it's his fault. V'netula ani min haYehudim. Or if she makes a claim that I am prohibited to all Jews. Now, previously, we always, and every time this came up, we understood it to be that the Tula Mina Yehudim means all other Jewish people except for my husband, or alternatively, the Tula Mina Yehudim meant it kicked in after she got divorced. But here, she took on a pledge to be usher to all Jews, period, including her husband. And if she's going to be usher to her husband, they can't be married. So 3 scenarios whereby all she had to do is come to Beis Din and make a claim. Either I was raped, or my husband has fertility issues, or C, I took on a pledge that I'm usher to all people. In all 3 of those scenarios, she was able to get divorced and collect on her ksuba. Chazru Laimar, they changed. However, as time went on, they changed. And Laimar to say, Shalait Hey Isha, and they sent us a Neha Ba'acha. They were concerned that maybe she had her eyes on someone else.
Oh, right.
Midlife crisis. Umekalkelas al Habailam. And she was taking her husband lightly. She wants to get out of her marriage. So therefore, because this maybe became a little, some people found it too easy in a way to get out of their marriage. So they started to become aware of this. Therefore, if a woman came to Beis Din and claimed that she was tamei to her husband who was a kohen, why was she tamei? Because she claimed that she was raped. Tavi raya l'dvar. So the Beis Din said, okay, you got to bring proof, bring edim. Hashamayim beini lebeincha. If she claimed, again, a euphemism that this problem we have only heaven knows about it, which was basically a euphemism for the fact that they weren't having children and she was blaming the husband. Yasu derech bakasha. So you have to try to appease them. You have to try to make it work out.
Wasn't there like a time frame? I'm not sure it was like 10 years. Like if they didn't have kids within 10 years.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that absolutely. But this is just a situation where she wants to get out. So she says,
so
"Oh, yeah."
this is probably before 10 years. It's probably,
There's a
a couple of years.
yeah, okay. So she's making a claim saying that it's not working. It's not going to happen.
That's just what we
Then,
got from Abraham and Hagar.
Yeah,
Or no, Sarah. So if you having any kids, take a copy. That's where we got that from.
If she says, "Oh, I made a pledge or a vow that I'm not going to have to do with any Jewish people," so yefer l'chel, right? So then what happens? They tell the husband, "Okay, so just annul her vow. You don't have to annul her vow related to everybody, just your portion, l'chel, right? And then you can go home, you can have relations, and she can still remain usher to everybody." So back in the day, there was a situation where all she had to do was make a claim. When the Chachamim realized that this was being treated maybe a little bit too lightly, and women were found that this was an easy way to get out of their marriage, they changed it and they said either you got to bring proof, either you got to try to appease her, or maybe the most important thing here as relates to our Gemara is that the husband can annul her vow to be usher to all Yehudim, and this way, once she removes her vows, that is no longer an easy way to get out.
I mean, I'm wondering why she even said this ridiculous vow, actually.
Well, it's very easy. Once she becomes usher to all Jews, including her husband, they can't live together. She's usher to him.
Oh. I mean, I would think that she might want to get married to someone else. So if she does that, she definitely can't.
Yeah, okay. Well, she's living in the moment. She just wants to get out of the thing. All right, that's where I left off. And tomorrow we'll come back for the final.
Wow.
Excellent, thank you. Did you happen to run across a comment about whether this situation requires a get from the husband, or can Beis Din do it completely on their own?
I have no clue.
I don't either.
I mean, I would assume you need a get. I don't know how the Beis Din could do it on their own, because there's plenty of situations whereby a woman remains, let's say, in aguna. Beis Din can't just enact a divorce on their own, at least not that I know of. But then again, I'm not a professional.
Well done, thank you.
Thank you.
That
Good
when
day.
the husband was overseas, and he sent an emissary, he would say like in front of me it was signed and it was delivered.
For sure.
So it looks like part of the delivery is part of the process.
Absolutely, for sure. I would assume so. All right, boys and girls, we'll do it again tomorrow. Same time, same place.
Wow. Wonderful.
Thank you.
I don't know. I hope we did this right.